felt like there was so many more mountains to climb. I didn't know if I had it in me. Of course, you never really do.
Can you tell me what it was like as a child when you first started to feel, that you might be different or you might have a mental health challenge?
I think my first sense that I was dealing with something different was at a very young age, actually. But that it was specifically a mental health challenge was not till much later. I always felt like there was a hole inside of me. Now I know that to a certain degree, a lot of that sensation of loneliness comes to a certain degree from being afflicted with the disease of addiction. But I also know that from the people that I've spoken to that suffer from mental illnesses, that it's a very similar feeling, that they always felt apart from as opposed to a part of. I never really remember feeling like mental illness or thought processes being different was something that was really different specifically about what I was suffering from until actually a doctor told me, this is what you suffer from. This is what we call this.
And Yolande, maybe you could share with us some of your thoughts. Years ago, there was research that came out that was suggesting at the time that there was a link between parenting, specifically mothers, and that schizophrenia had a very behavioral learned component. How did that make you feel? We know that not to be true today. But maybe you can share with me some of your thoughts, what it was like.
I was a mom, and I had 3 boys. And my job was to get them up and give them breakfast in the morning and get them to school and put clean clothes on them and do all of those things. So I didn't give a lot of thought to that, I always sort of, here's the problem, let's deal with the problem in front of us.
I have a feeling, Yolande, that maybe what he's, you did all those things, but at the same time you had a very unruly child. And did people perhaps consider you, considered bad parenting perhaps, that you couldn't control your child?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I mean, people were always sort of pointing fingers at me. However, I had a pretty thick skin. I still do. And so, unlike my mother, I really wasn't terribly concerned about what they had to say because I knew who I was. I was more concerned about the way in which Stephen was treated as a result of his behavior and how he was ostracized. Was much more concerned about that than myself. I mean, Stephen's behavior was known to me to be different when he was 5 months old. I had 2 other children. So I understood that Stephen went places that the other boys didn't go in the middle of a play session. And I knew that he couldn't sleep and that he had gross motor problems and that he was hyperactive and he had a really short attention span and he never learned anything by osmosis. Every new situation, it was like the situation that we had just been through before. There was no perceived linking of the 2 as being part of the same kind of situation, right? Like he would go to somebody's house and bring home an airplane, and I would say, Stephen, that's called theft. You're taking somebody else's plane, so, you can't do that. When you go to somebody else's house, their toys remain at their house. So he would come home the next week, and he would have a car. And I'd say, Stephen, you cannot bring home a car. I told you that last week. He said, no, we talked about a plane, not a car. So, so it's very hard. When you have a child like Steve, you just have to basically, every event, and there were many of them, because, you know, think of a day, it's pretty long, right? And everything is into little bites and snapshots. And so there's one crisis after another, and, you know, like, you're not even sure when you get to the end what, you just are lost.
Can I just add, I have one memory that I've been thinking about the last few days that stands out in my mind. Stephen couldn't have been more than 11. You were visiting our house on Athlone, and you'd been there for the weekend, we all had a good time, and it was time to go home, and Stephen didn't want to get in the car. And that's normal, he was having a good time, he didn't want to get in the car, but it accelerated.
Escalated.
It just hit such a height, it ended up that he ran down the street, which
I
was right in
remember
front of
that.
a church.
I remember that.
And he was screaming like a stuck pig at the
Oh.
slaughterhouse. He was just screaming, and he fought to get in that car, and people were sticking their heads out the window,
I remember that.
and it was just unbelievable.
I was sort of like dealing with all of this behavior, like one thing after another, looking for answers. I went to doctors, I got them on nutritional therapy, multivitamin therapy, you know, mega vitamins. I mean, it was constantly looking for a key to unlock what was going on in his mind. And it's weird that I never, ever once thought of schizophrenia. And one night, when he was about 10 or 11, and he couldn't sleep at night, I said, Stephen, you're still not sleeping? And he said, no. And I said, come out here.
Sleeping.
And he came out, and I started to talk to him, and he said, Mom, I need a shrink. And so, of course, I got him a shrink, and she
Shrink?
changed our life. So what is really interesting, she helped Stephen to think. She gave him preparation, she gave him exit strategies, she helped him to sort of stop and think instead of just, you know, deciding, okay, there's a baseball game going on in the gymnasium at school, this empty gymnasium, while he's on his way back from a bathroom break. And what he really needed was he needed to stop and think, lengthen his attention span, and ask himself, is this the right thing to do at this time? Is it appropriate? What will be the results? He had 5 years of this. I mean, it was great. He became a good chess player, right, Steve?
No.
Yeah, you did.
No.
Yeah, I thought you had a good rating.
I didn't have a good rating until I played chess in my 20s. That
Okay.
was we played chess, but I wouldn't call it chess.
But
now.
anyway, you know what he was just saying to Inga before, well, I didn't really start to think that my behavior was inappropriate when this happened, this, you know, very significant event in his life when he decided, wow, I've got to change something. So even though he had all those years of playing chess and learning strategies, he would lose them. And that's basically what I was trying to say, is that when he was a little kid, you could teach him one thing, but he didn't link one thing with the same thing, another thing that was really the same thing. Steve's life changed for me when he got clean.
And that was my question. Steve, have you ever self-medicated with drugs and alcohol? And maybe can you talk to us about that experience and sort of walk us through that?
The power of my addiction versus the power of my schizophrenia, I would say they were both equally and jointly, attempting to destroy me. I think of my diseases as entities within me that try to destroy me now. And I think the reason I look at them that way is because they're a part of me, but they're not interested in my life and in my livelihood and in my well-being. And I think of that because of the disease concept that was taught to me at rehab. and it was taught to me and to all the other people in rehab for the same reason, that because unless they view this force that lives within them as something that that they can't beat on their own, but that there's a way to do it, there's a process by which they can recover, then there's really no hope for recovery. Because unless they view these, because let's face it, if you have cancer, does anybody for a second not recognize the power that cancer has over the human body? Nobody. Nobody for a second has any illusions about what cancer might do to them, right? Right. Same thing with mental illness. Only if you have any illusions about what mental illness can do to you, if you have any belief that mental illness cannot destroy you, guess what's going to happen? It's probably going to destroy you. So it's important to understand, it was important for the people in rehab to give us a clear idea of what it was we were up against. And that's, how the disease concept, I guess, came into being, right? In terms of those particular illnesses, addiction and or mental illness. And especially for people that suffer from the combination of both. And from what I understand, more often than not, people that suffer from schizophrenia, I don't know what the percentages are, maybe you know more than me, but I bet you it's got to be at least 50% of those people that have a secondary addiction as well, aside from schizophrenia. In fact, I'll tell you, in my experience living in group homes and living and working in occupational therapy programs, it's probably a coin flip as to whether or not they were suffering from addiction as well, on top of their other illnesses.
So what types of substances were you using, and how did you get clean?
Well, I mean, I didn't use any crazy drugs. I drank a lot, but people often understand, I think, how powerful the addiction to alcohol is. It's an enormously powerful drug, an enormously addictive drug. Alcohol was a big one for me. It was a big marijuana. But back in the 90s, you could be smoking marijuana and God knows what else you were smoking with it too, because drug dealers would always spray it to make it more potent. They would add PCP to it. They would spray it with cocaine. And I also did a fair bit of cocaine at the end of my using. The last, say, 3 months of my using, I got into cocaine. I did a bit of cocaine. Not a lot of cocaine by some people's standards. Some people would say they threw more of that away on a day-to-day basis than what I used in a day. But whatever, I'm not going to consider myself what their addiction was. I know I was using coke, every second day minimum the last 3 months of my addiction. Anywhere from a quarter gram to a half gram to sometimes a gram a day, which really isn't a lot of coke for some people, but for me, I mean, seeing as I'd never done coke before, it was certainly enough.
And how did you get clean?
I had an awakening of sorts. I was lying in bed on a Saturday night, and my heart was going a mile a minute, and I thought I might have a heart attack there, and nobody would find me. And for a moment, I was okay with that. And then in the next moment, I was not okay with that. I was not okay with that being the end of me, that being my legacy. Although, interesting, once again, it was about, almost about ego in a way, that I will not have them find me like this. I don't know. I guess that's ego, or maybe it's just a desire to do something more than that.
And so today, describe your life. You're married, you have 2 children, you work, you go to school. Can you elaborate on that? Like about your kids.
Oh, I have a lot of gifts today. I have a beautiful, rambunctious, vibrant, passionate, empathic 8-year-old boy. I have an enormously creative, artistic, bright-eyed, loving daddy's little girl, 6-year-old daddy's little girl. I'm a very lucky man.
You're married?
I am married. I have a lovely, caring, hardworking wife who herself has some really tough physical disabilities. and she fights through every day to get through her life and to be a parent, and we have a lot. We struggle a lot, but we have a lot.
I wonder if you could tell me a little bit about what psychosis was like for you, and share that.
Psychosis was in it. Psychosis was, psychosis. The term psychosis, I guess, covers a lot of symptoms. What was it like? On the other side, it was kind of horrifying. But while you're in it, you don't know that you're when you're in the middle of a psychosis, you definitely don't know that you're in the middle of a psychosis. It's just what you're going through. It's your day-to-day life. The symptoms are just sort of a part of your routine. Whereas on the other side, years later, I look back at some of those symptoms. I'm like, oh my God, as if I was going through that, as if the people that loved and cared for me had to experience that alongside of me. It's kind of horrifying. Audio and visual hallucinations. Yeah.
What was that like?
Sometimes I would have conversations with people in my life. I'd go off and into like a dreamlike state, I guess, would be best described as. I don't know what it would look like from the outside in. I only know how I experienced it. The thing is, those conversations, those events that occur within a hallucination, to the individual, they are real. They are as much part of your daily history as anything else that occurred that day. You went for a pizza, you went and got a slice of pizza, and then later you were talking to a couple of friends in hallucination. That part of your day was as real as going for the slice of pizza. There was no differentiation between what was real and not, because they were both equally real.
And
they were a part of your memory.
The period leading up to the active phase, where you actually you experience these psychotic events, we call it the prodromal phase. This is sort of this leading into phase where there's some deterioration, and you start to notice things slipping a little bit. Can you describe what that was like? That early phase before actually getting into sort of full-blown psychosis? Did you notice things starting to come apart, unravel?
I don't think I ever remember there being for me, I think it was seamless. I think the thing that was not seamless for me, where I came apart as a person, was when it got worse near the end. When I finally started to get help. When somebody was actually able to make it apparent to me that this was not real, or that at the very least what I was engaged in was not healthy, certainly not for me, and was certainly different, and certainly not something as simple as a distraction to the people around me. Something much more than a distraction.
Would you have these experiences, like talking with people, and would this be like once a week, or a couple times a month, or every day?
Constant. A couple times a day.
And from what age?
Several times a day.
Like 18, 19, or?
I think from around 16, 17, right through till I was 20.
And then, when was your first diagnosis? When you were formally diagnosed, how old were you? And Yolanda, maybe you can speak to that.
You know this more than I do in terms of timeline. 17?
No, Stephen was actually in his 16th year, but he hadn't turned. It was in the fall, in October. It was a bright, sunny day. Yeah. And I was called to meet with the psychologist. And I did not know that anything important was going to happen on that day. Because I often talked with her. She would see Steve twice a week. And I went in and I sat down, and she said, I have some news for you. And she told me. And I, honestly, I just disintegrated. I felt like I was broken glass. And I don't even understand why I could have spent all those years not even thinking about that. I never heard the words ADD or ADHD. I heard that he was hyperactive and that he had a short attention span. And I came from a family with mental illness. And I had heard the word schizophrenia before, but it never even crossed my mind to associate it with what Stephen was going through. So I guess that says a lot about the kind of person that I was.
No.
And that he was just my boy, and he was smart, and he was funny, and he was compassionate. And he taught me so much, and I just wanted him to reach his potential and to be happy and to live a good life. And so when that happened, for me, it was like, I went away from there. I couldn't even talk to her. I just got up and walked out of the room. I didn't ask any questions. I just walked out of the room, and I found a seat somewhere there in the hospital, I don't know where, because I couldn't hardly walk. And because as soon as I heard that word, I knew that it was over, and that it was incurable, and that he wasn't going to get better. And he wasn't going to be released from all the problems that he had. And so it took me a while to realize that all of that was just a reaction, and that Stephen was fine. He was my son. He would always be my son. He wasn't dead. He was alive. And look at him. Look at him. How many people do you know who can have the kind of drug addiction that he had, and he hasn't even had a relapse in the last 19 and a half years?
Yeah.
I
don't know how that happened.
And he navigates his own way through life very successfully, and is able to accomplish all the things that he wants to do. So it's great, right? And he's a musician.
Yeah, an audio engineer.
And he writes wonderful songs, and he used to write wonderful songs. And in his songs, Mark, there's one song that he wrote that really says it all about the dance that he lived, and the night, and all the closed doors, and the darkness that he had to live through, and how it takes superhuman effort to be able to do the things that Stephen does today.
If there's one really thing that comes to mind with your mother, is love and compassion and commitment.
I was looking for a high five there, but
Okay,
you're going to get each other.
Fist bump.
There's so many people out there, little boys and little girls, adults, men and women with schizophrenia and with mental illness,
I know.
or mental health challenges. What would you say to them to try and give them hope? Because you're such an inspiration, and you're so courageous and dedicated to.
There's a friend of mine. There's a friend of mine named George Nostrand, and he lives in Vermont. And I met him on a plane, and he is a mental health advocate, and he suffered from mental illness as well. He had me go up to Vermont and speak at a mental health institution, and he had me go speak, and he said, "What would you tell them?" And I thought, what would I tell them? And here's what I'm going to say. Here's what you do. Find that place who you are. Find that thing. Whatever it was that you were growing up that made you tick, the thing that spoke to you more than any other thing in your life, all those things that you love to do, when you're suffering from mental health issues, the biggest thing that you suffer from is you don't have self-esteem, you don't have drive, you don't have that thing to hold on to that gets you through the days. That thing that you love, because more often than not, your disease just dominates your ability to do anything, right? So whatever it is that you love to do, if you're suffering from mental illness, if you're suffering from drug addiction, find those things that as a child you simply loved. For me, in your dining room, you had records, you had Magical Mystery Tour, and you had Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and you had Strawberry Fields Forever, and I used to listen to those records, and when I was done the record, I would put the next one on and drop the needle and listen to the whole side, and then I would put the next one on and drop the needle and listen to the whole side, and when I was done, I'd go back to the first one, okay? And I loved music, so for me, it was about music, and I did not really discover how much music was supposed to be such an important part of my life until I got sober. But for the people that, you know, are unaware, it's there, it's in them, it's always been there, those things that speak to them. If it's board gaming, if it's swimming, if it's playing floor hockey, if it's, you know, the Special Olympics have these programs for people that have mental illnesses where they can play floor hockey and volleyball and, you know, wheelchair basketball. Get out there, find the people that are like you. They know you better than anybody else, and you know what, there's nothing wrong with being with the people that are just like you, doing the things that you love just like them. And these are the things that are going to drive you. These are the things that are going to give you courage and confidence and self-love. Because you know what? These are the things that will allow people to recover. It's not the medications that will allow people to recover. They allow people to sustain day to day. But the things that will allow people to recover are the things that will fill them spiritually. Not physically, not medically. Find the things in your life that have always helped you feel whole, or more whole than you felt otherwise. Joyful. And those things are the things that we need to stick to, because everything else around us, whether we become employable or not, whether we end up having families or not, those are hard to measure as to whether or not the likelihood of those things are going to happen for people with mental illnesses. But what we need more than anything to get us to those places in our lives is to feel whole, to feel joyful, to feel like we are having a good time in our lives. No matter what we are going through, we have to have moments of those days every day. If you don't have a cat, but you'd like to have a cat, damn well have a cat. You know? Those things like that, you know?
But don't steal the cat from somebody
Don't
else.
steal the cat. And don't steal the dog, because the dog isn't a cat.
There's nothing left to lose. There's nothing left to prove.